The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM-LP at 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough.
If you visit our website, thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, you can find all of our past episodes going back to 2010. To never miss an episode, click the podcasting link, where you can find instructions on how to subscribe to our podcast using iTunes or whatever music app or program you like, including our soon-to-be resurrected Error 451 podcast, an occasional tech security podcast from an anarchist perspective. In the near future, we hope to bring you two perspectives on encryption from PEP, or Pretty Easy Protection, a foundation that has taken over some of the efforts around PGP or GPG, end-to-end encryption in email, and also from the LEAP Encryption Access Project, or LEAP as an acronym, which brings you the Bitmask VPN as well as encrypted end-to-end email.
And you can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you end up using any content. If you care to, you can send us letters at our new address, which is The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina 28816. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.
This week I spoke with Sahar Francis, the Director of Addameer. Addameer is a non-governmental organization, or NGO, based in Ramallah in the West Bank in occupied Palestine that focuses on human rights advocacy, political prisoner support, and public education efforts like Know Your Rights trainings. Addameer is one of the projects that's receiving a portion of the profits from the 2019 Certain Days political prisoner calendars that we've heard so much of in past episodes. In an update to our past episode featuring Mary Ratcliffe of the SF Bayview National Black newspaper from August, we have some good news. Amani Sawari, who we interviewed in July about the nationwide prison strike as an outside spokesperson for Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, will be stepping up to take on the editorial position at the paper and giving Mary and Dr. Willie Ratcliffe a long-deserved break. There's an online fundraiser to help get Amani situated in the Bay Area, where you can support the transition and hopefully long next phase of the paper. You can find out more at patreon.com/sfbayview. Stay tuned next week for an overview of the 2018 nationwide prison strike with an incarcerated organizer named Dee from Jailhouse Lawyers Speak. If you're in the Asheville area, coming up on Saturday, November 17th, from 4 to 6 p.m. at Firestorm Books and Coffee, Blue Ridge Anarchist Black Cross will be giving a free interactive presentation on online hygiene and security self-defense, threat modeling the far right. But whether you're concerned about what info's online that might fall into the hands of Fash, a stalker, or just want to tie up some loose ends, a lot of tools and tips are the same. Bring a laptop, a tablet, or a phone to work on. And a few hours later, there will be a concert by Nomadic War Machine at the Bottle Shop, an electronic assault by Margaret Killjoy, that you're welcome to swing by and enjoy. And finally, Davon Person is a prisoner being accused of inciting a riot in September at the Craggy Correctional Institution just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, where he was just about to reach minimum security levels. It's requested that people call officials to press them to hear his appeal of innocence, because he claims he didn't do it. He's asking that folks on the outside call with persistence, and you can direct those appeals to Kenneth E. Lassiter, the Director of Prison Facilities, at 919-838-4000, or at 919-838-3755. David Rogers, the state representative, can be reached at 919-733-5749. Ralph Heiss, North Carolina Senator representing District 47, can be reached at 919-733-3460. And you can express your concerns through calling or writing to North Carolina Department of Public Safety, 512 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27604. Or calling 733-2126. And all these numbers will be found in our show notes for the episode.
I'm joined by Sahar Francis, the director of Addameer. Addameer is one of the groups receiving funds from the sale of the 2019 Certain Days Political Prisoners calendars. Sahar, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
My pleasure.
So this is the 70th anniversary of Nakba. Can you talk about this and the March of Return protests and what effect your organization has seen on the situation of prisoners in light of that?
I think it's very important to highlight that after 70 years of the Nakba, it's more clear than ever that the same policies that were used inside Israel immediately after the establishment in 1948 against the Palestinian community and still used, like land confiscation, house demolitions, and lots of other policies are used in the same way, more or less, in the occupied territories, after 1967, which means really that there's no green line anymore from the point of these violations and these policies. And this is why it's very important to get back to this discussion of what happened actually in 48, and not just to discuss the Palestinian issue from the point of 1967 occupation. Solving the issue of the occupation itself will not end the Palestinian cause, because there's the Palestinian the Palestinian community inside Israel and their rights, and there's the issue of the right of return that actually Israel and the United States is aiming to put an end for this cause, and by putting all this pressure from the US side on the UNRWA, for example, the UN agency, the special agency for the Palestinian refugees, cutting all the funds from the United States, has one aim, is to totally paralyze this agency and to put an end for the issue of the Palestinian refugees. And this is what initiated actually all these circumstances, and the blockade, of course, for the last 11 years on Gaza, and all the harsh situation that people lives under in Gaza, caused for this great return march that started in March, in the Land Day, actually, this year, and continues, because I think mainly it's about the blockade, to lift the blockade, but as well to insist on the right of return, and that the Palestinian issue is not just about the borders of 1967 and the Palestinian state, without dealing with all the other main issues of refugees, of East Jerusalem, of the Palestinians inside Israel.
For those who don't know the term right of return, can you describe that, and can you talk about how many refugees are living in the diaspora internationally and wanting to return home?
Of course, what happened in 48, that when the different Israeli groups succeeded in defeating the Palestinians and the Arab army who was present in the Palestinian land, and they caused a refuge of more than 700,000 Palestinians. They were expelled out of their homeland to the neighboring countries, and later to other countries all over the world. So, and internally, and it continued in 1967 when they occupied the rest of historic Palestine. They also caused that hundreds of thousands became refugees for the second time internally, and those who were already outside the occupied territories were not allowed to come back, and thousands were expelled from the occupied territories to Jordan or to Egypt. This has caused a huge community of refugees from 48 and 67. Some of them, they are still living in the occupied territories, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank. These are, I think, around 2 million people. And outside, it's around 10 million people that they are still waiting to be able to go back to their homeland in historic, like Palestine.
And those populations that are waiting to come back, that 10 million you said, I mean, many of them are also like they're not being resettled into the countries that they're in. There's a lot of them are living in refugee camps still generations in. Is that right?
Yes, of course, especially in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Jordan. These are the main three Arab countries who hosted Palestinian refugees in 48 and also in 67. And in these countries, refugees are still living in refugee camps. And they don't I would say the most difficult situation is in Lebanon, maybe because the Lebanese state didn't granted them almost any right. So there's lots of works that they are not allowed to work, and they don't have much rights in Lebanon. The situation was a bit different in Syria up till the war in Syria. Unfortunately, the conflict in Syria affected a lot the Palestinian refugees, especially in the Yarmouk camp. In Jordan, it's also difficult. The Palestinian people there, some of them, they were getting the Jordanian citizenship back in the early 50s, and they are not living anymore in the refugees camps, but others, they are still living in the refugee camps, even in Jordan.
Can you please tell listeners about Addameer, what you all do, what the name means, and where you operate out of, and so forth?
Yeah, so Dameer is the Arabic word for conscious, and it's a Palestinian non-governmental organization that was founded in late 1991 in the years of the first Intifada, in order to offer free legal aid for Palestinian political prisoners arrested by the Israeli occupation. And since then, we developed to include as well monitoring and documentation program based on our monthly visits to all of the prisons and detention facilities. And we do our advocacy, of course, based on our legal work and our documentation. We also have a raising awareness program for local communities, mostly people that could be targeted and arrested, students and youth. Dameer is based in Ramallah, actually, and we also cover the political prisoners under the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately.
And could you define what for younger listeners, they may not be familiar with or in the United States in particular, what a non-governmental organization is? Are you affiliated with any specific political organizations such as Hamas or PFLP or Fatah?
Definitely not. In the Palestinian law, it's illegal to be affiliated with any political entity. NGOs mean that a group of activists or people, like ordinary people, decides to organize. And the minimum that is requested is 7 people, of course, to organize in a NGO in order to deliver services. It could be academic, it could be legal aid, it could be health issues, agriculture, education, any kind of services. And usually the NGOs don't get financial support from the Palestinian Authority as well. So we get support from international organizations or local entities like banks or investors or whatever, including as well European countries or other donating countries that they want to support the human rights sector in the occupied territories. So, of course, Addameer is not politicized. We represent all kinds of prisoners from all different political parties and even not affiliated prisoners. And we do, like in our work, the framework for our legal aid and other documentation and advocacy, of course, is the Palestinian law, the international human rights law, and the international humanitarian law.
There are some that make the argument that supporting prisoners in and of itself is a political act because incarceration is a political act, no matter not at all like in reference a la politics to a specific government or political affiliation or organization. Do you believe that that incarceration is a political act and that prisoners are political in and of themselves?
In our context, of course, all these prisoners are arrested because of their resistance against the occupation, whether their resistance is considered to be within a civil society movement or specific activities. So for us, defending these prisoners, of course, there is a political saying behind our work that we are against the occupation and we want to see this occupation ending and that the Palestinian people can get their self-determination, their own state, and all the basic rights that were confirmed by the UN Security Council and UN General Assembly resolutions. So we don't deny that in our work there is a political saying, but this political saying is fully, in my eyes, follow the international law framework. More than that, I think the legal aid that we support the Palestinian prisoners, at the end, each detainee and each prisoner everywhere in the world deserve a fair trial procedures. And the legal counseling and the legal support and monitoring torture and ill treatment and even advocacy on behalf of these prisoners is something that is considered to be very essential in any trial and in any legal procedures.
So on your website, addameer.org, you have a profile section for prisoners that are listed. Can you talk about the prisoners that are in that section? Are they continued to be listed there after they are released, or are some missing in the Israeli system or under permanent supervision?
What we do actually, we update the cases. So if someone is released, we mention this in the profile. We update the profile, but we don't take it out of the list because the main point behind this section is to make the stories more personal. So we put the photo with the family details, the education, and the legal case, of course, for each prisoner. The way how we pick these cases, we try to highlight trends and thematic areas under the imprisonment process. So, for example, you would find cases of administrative detainees in order to highlight all policies related to the administrative detention. You can find child detainees cases, you can find women detainees, parliamentarians, and health cases. So we use the profile in order to highlight a policy in the process of the imprisonment.
You had mentioned, just to jump back a little bit, you had mentioned before consciousness-raising projects for some of the youth and people living in Ramallah and other parts of the occupied territories, I think. Can you talk about what those are and why those are necessary?
Basically, it's Know Your Right project that we developed by the years. From our experience, we discovered not all the community is aware about the rights of the prisoners, especially under interrogation, and the techniques of torture that they face, and what's the legal procedures that they should expect in front of the military court or the civil court for Jerusalem residents. So this is why the organization decided to develop this program. It includes public talks, public meetings with students, with the public in general. So we implement it sometimes in universities or sometimes just in the community centers and so, in order to discuss with young people, with families of prisoners, that they can ask questions about the specific cases they have and so on. We also developed some videos related to Know Your Rights, especially for children. And we do sometimes radio series in order to discuss publicly these issues.
So I'm going to sound a bit ignorant, and I'm a bit ignorant about the realities of the Israeli occupation. But so I'm probably going to ask some very simple questions to sort of flesh out some details for people in the listening audience who are in the U.S. or elsewhere and maybe don't understand or get different news about what the occupation is like. Is that all right?
Of course.
Okay. So you mentioned military courts versus civilian courts, and you mentioned juvenile detainees. Can you talk about a circumstance where a juvenile might be taken into a military court and how that would differ from a civilian court and what the implications of a civilian in a military court would be?
Yes, for sure. So since the beginning of the occupation in 1967, the Israeli authorities established this military system with the military courts, of course. Currently, there's 2 military courts that operates in the occupied territories. It's not including East Jerusalem, of course, because Israel decided to annex East Jerusalem illegally. This is a violation for the international law back in 1970-71. And since then, there's 2 different legal systems that are imposed on the Palestinian community in the occupied territories. Those who live in the West Bank until 2005 in Gaza Strip were facing the military system, where people from Jerusalem were facing the Israeli civil system. So it ends up that if they arrest anyone, including children, in the West Bank, today they would be brought for the military court. In 2010, they invented a new military court for juveniles. It's working in the same way, the same procedures. We can say that there's no specific protection offered in the military system for these kids. The only difference could be with the adults on the level of that the courts is behind like closed doors in order to protect the identity of the child. But for example, in the case of Ahd al-Tamimi, it was open the whole time till the last session, actually, when the court decided to close doors. And the other difference is the length of the period of detention before being brought the first time in front of a judge. So against an adult, it's 96 hours in the military court system, where in the juveniles cases, it's 72 hours. It was just amended lately. Where in the civil system, according to the Israeli Criminal Code, a juvenile should be brought in front of the court within 12 hours or 24 hours maximum. And of course, the procedures are a bit different, and the level of sentences. And in the civil court, it's much easier that you can release a child on bail, for example, till the end of the procedures under house arrest or other conditions, where in the military courts it's more difficult. But both groups would be, if they would be sentenced for custodial sentence, they would be imprisoned in the same prisons inside Israel, in the security sections, so they would face the same daily conditions of harassment and punishments and lack of education, lack of health treatment. and so on. It should be highlighted that the military system that is imposed in the occupied territories is not applicable for the settlers, the Israeli Jewish settlers who lives in the occupied territories, any violation of the international law. So if they commit any crime, even if it's killing a Palestinian, they would be brought to the civil system inside Israel. Of course, there's much details about the legal procedures in the military court, but I can summarize that even if it comes for the definition of the crimes, it's violating the international humanitarian law standards for military courts. And when it comes for the geographical jurisdiction of these courts, they granted the court extraterritorial jurisdiction, again, in violation for the international law. And of course, the procedures are not respecting the fair trial procedures. So this is really a very problematic system that we are trying to highlight all these violations that takes place on daily basis in front of these military courts in the occupied territories.
This is the Syrian singer Samee Shakir with the track Wa'ida al-Kubida al-Mar, roughly translated as If They Drop You Into the Dark, a song taken up by Palestinian prisoner solidarity activists.
ولو يرموك بالعتمة لوحدك بين جدرانك عشب جواك رح يطلع ويزهر غصن وجدانك مع ظفرك يا هالأشعار تحفرك عحيطانك وانت الحر لو بالجيد ومنك خوف سجانك. شاحب ولكن يوزع ضيق ويا العطشان لرفقانك ومش للمي ويهب شاحب ولكن يوزع ضيق ويا العطشان لرفقانك ومش للمي وأحزانك وآلامك ضريبة حبك لناسك بحاد الموت تدخل وتطلع منه أجمل حي بحاد الموت تدخل وتطلع منه أجمل حي وجهك شاحب ولكن يوزع ضيق يوزع ضيق. في زمن تعدوا تقطعوا وترجع ولا في أمي تغسلك ومن خبزاتها تشبع وجوا السجن ما في زمن تعدوا تقطعوا وترجع ولا في أمي تغسلك ومن خبزاتها تشبع وصوت الصمت عالي يقطع صوته كل شوي عني ودمع الرجال غالي لكن لو نزلت تدرون شو معناه وصوت الصمت عالي يقطع صوته كل شوي عني دمع الرجال غالي لكن لو نزلت تدرون شو معناه وحده الحجر ما بيبكي وانتو ناس الدمع مش هم بس يبقى عالي الراس ما نرجع ولا نبيع المبادئ ولو بالكيل ولو بالكي اتحاد الموت تدخل وتطلع منه أجمل حي. اتحاد الموت تدخل وتطلع منه أجمل حي. ويهب شاحب لكن يوزع ضيق، يوزع ضيق. ولو يرموا بالعتمي لوحدك بين جدرانك عشب جواك رح يطلع ويزهق غصن وجدانك مع ظهرك. يا هالأشعار تحضرها عحيطانك وانت الحر لو بالجيد منك فوق زيادك.
I'd imagine one of the elements of how those courts run is a lack of representation or a lack of resources in order to argue on one's behalf or have legal aid. And especially for juveniles, it seems like a terribly important aspect. What sort of, just to keep on this point, can you talk about what sort of age range you might find of juveniles in military detention, of Palestinians in military detention?
The minimum age of criminal responsibility is 12 years. So they do arrest children as young as 12 years old, but I would say that mostly you can find children between 13, 14 mainly, and 18. And it should be highlighted that till 2012, actually, the Palestinian juvenile was defined as young as 16, not 18. This is also another problem that was just amended in the last couple of years. So now it's considered to be 18. But as I said, like the problem in these military courts, not the lack of the resources or the fact that a lawyer can represent or not. It's the system itself and the way how they draft the charges, the crimes that they face, that these children face in these military courts, the way how the court operate, and the fact that, for example, everything is in Hebrew and the translation is so bad, and most of the Palestinian lawyers are not they don't learn the Israeli criminal system in the Palestinian universities. So you are, as a lawyer, you are supposed to work within a system that you don't know very well in order to deal with illegal case. And this is also affects why most of these cases ends up at the end of the day with plea bargain. The level of plea bargains in the military courts is more than 99%. This is amazing. And most of these cases are built basically on the confessions of these children or the adults, where these confessions are collected after a torture in the interrogation and ill treatment, and of course, according to the military system or the Israeli criminal code, these confessions wouldn't be voidable, like it would be accepted, and then it's up to the court which way to give for these evidences. As I said, the language is another obstacle. The bad treatment that they face in the transfer between the prison and the court in the day of the hearing, what we call the bosta, it's the bus that they transfer the detainees with. They face lots of humiliation, bad conditions. So it's a nightmare for them to go back and forth every week to the court. This is why they push to end the case with a plea bargain. Different aspects actually affect the way how these cases are held in front of the military court system.
So, Sahar, the work that Addameer is doing seems really important in terms of highlighting people's cases, keeping them out of the shadows, raising them up into the light, to use another metaphor, I guess. As a human rights and prisoner rights organization, and you point to the international laws that are being transgressed by the military occupation, by their courts. Can you talk about what kind of recourse Addameer is seeking on behalf of the grievances that you're raising?
Of course, we are fully aware that it's not a very easy work. The opposite. Sometimes it's really very depressing that the level of success is very minimum. And what we try to do in using the international legal system is first to be sure that these facts and these violations are well reported and documented in the different UN channels. So no one later can say, no, we were not aware, no, we didn't get this information. Because we also know that there's not much to be done on the UN level, the special procedures. I mean, like when we refer a case for the working group on arbitrary detention, we know that they will issue a statement at the end or a decision that this case is really an arbitrary detention case. But how to impose it on the Israeli side, how to implement this decision, it's hopeless. We know that we are not going to succeed to release an administrative detainee because we felt his case to the working group. But for us, the advocacy and the lobbying level is very important to publish these cases and to send them to these, to use them in these mechanisms. Maybe one day as well, we can reach a level where we can seek accountability. I mean, it's also very important for us that these war crimes and crimes against humanity committed every day in the military court by not offering fair trial for the Palestinian prisoners, by using torture, by other violations, grave violations for the international law, should be documented in order that maybe one day we can seek accountability via the International Criminal Court or a special tribunal, or using the universal jurisdiction procedures in one country or another.
It would seem like to me, outside of the potential of that happening on a legal level at some point in the future, that there's an importance to engaging one's dignity in the face of cruel treatment, you know, in the way that like consciousness raising projects that you mentioned have a practical application to the youth that are learning what their legal rights are, and getting more comfortable and continuing to resist. I would imagine that Addameer serves a purpose in a wider cultural resistance of understanding and continuing to push that this is an unfair situation, and as opposed to the possibility that someone would just give in to the occupation, which is, I mean, it seems like a war of attrition of sorts. Do you see Addameer in that way?
Yeah, of course, because I think even our legal work directly with the prisoners, when we visit them under interrogation and we fight the system, because you should understand that the whole system, the whole procedures were built in a way that the purpose of this system is not punishing people for committing very serious crimes as international law was authorizing the occupiers. I mean, like, not every Palestinian detainee at the end is involved in a very serious militant attack against soldiers, correct? So we are fully aware that the purpose of these mass arrest campaigns and like the high level of imprisonment against the society is all about control and oppression. That they want to keep the control over the Palestinian society and they want to oppress people. They want to break the soul of these prisoners in the interrogation so they can gather more information to be used against others. They want to suppress all activities, even the simple activity of writing a post in your Facebook or in your Twitter, or being active in any studential movement in the Palestinian society. So it's affecting all of our political life at the end of the way. And this is why it's very important for Addameer as well to be supporting these detainees, to tell them, to explain to them their basic rights and their interrogation, the right to keep silent, the right not to criminalize yourself. All these rights are not respected by the system. When they decide to ban a Palestinian detainee from meeting his lawyer from day one under interrogation up till 30 days or 60 days, why you think they do it? Just in order to break them down and get the information without being able, these detainees wouldn't be able to get the correct legal counseling.
You mentioned posting on social media and being punished for such things, and I think a lot of people in my audience would be surprised to hear about that. Could you give an example of such an instance?
Yes, hundreds of Palestinian young people in the last 3-4 years were arrested and facing charges mainly of incitement because they dared to share a poster or a song or a picture of a martyr, or they wrote their opinion clearly against the occupation in their Facebook account. And it doesn't matter how many likes, for example, you got for this post or how many friends you have in your page. It's enough that they claim that the sentence or the link or the article you shared is calling in their, of course, analysis and that it's a violent or calling for violent or inciting. So it's enough. I would give an example, a very powerful case that was against a Palestinian poem, Dareen Tatour, and she also an Israeli citizen. She's a Palestinian living inside Israel. That in late 2015, early 2016, she published a poem, like encouraging, or let's say that she was talking about all the uprising activities at that time in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, demonstrating and brutally attacked. So she was arrested at the beginning and in the prison for 3 months. Later, she was released for house arrest. Her trial took place till last July, actually. For more than 2 years and a half, she was under fully house arrest to be sentenced at the end of the day for this publication for 5 months imprisonment. So she went back to prison this summer to spend the rest of the 2 months that she needed to do, and just for a poem that she published.
That's incredible. That's terrible. Looking at the Addameer website, there's a link called Campaigns, and you've mentioned administrative detention a few times. Can you talk about what that is and the problems with it?
This is one of the most difficult policies in the imprisonment that detainees can face, because it's really very harsh mental process for the detainees when you are arrested without knowing why you are arrested, because it's based on secret information. So the military governor actually in the occupied territories can decide against any Palestinian, a child, a woman, a man, a parliamentarian, a student, an activist. Everyone could be subjected for administrative detention. That based on the secret information he collected, you are a dangerous person, you cause a serious threat to the security, so he will arrest you from 1 month up to 6 months. And it could be renewed indefinitely. And this is the most difficult part, that you would expect that by the end of the first 6 months, you would be released. And then in the last day, you would get a renewal order for another 6 months or another 4 months. And people can spend like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. We had cases of people who spent 5 years continuously under administrative detention without being able to defend themselves, like which arguments they should bring in the court so they would be released. It's really very harsh because it's also difficult for the families that they don't know when their beloved would be released. So imagine a father that is arrested under administrative detention and his children don't know when they will meet their father again. And the working group on arbitrary detention and the Committee Against Torture, in some cases that we submitted, they confirmed that this can amount to a psychological torture. When someone is detained for indefinite period without knowing when he would be released, this can amount to psychological torture.
You mentioned that this was a punishment that any Palestinian could have wrought upon them. I mean, does the same go for Israeli settlers that are in the territories? Do they get held accountable in the same way, or what have you?
Of course, administrative detention is used as well in the Israeli system, but in a very, very restricted way. In the last 14 years, not more than between 10 and 14 Israelis were subjected for administrative detention for definitely less than 1 year. Most of the cases, 3 months or 6 months. The longest was 9 months, where if I would give you the statistics against Palestinians, like currently there's more than 450 administrative detainees. Definitely in the last 10 years, more than like thousands were arrested. In the first Intifada, for example, 10,000 Palestinians were subjected for administrative detention. In the second Intifada, just in 1 month, in March, April 2002, 2,500 Palestinians were subjected for administrative detention. In 2015, the number was around 2016, the number was around 700. Like in the last year, in any given month, the average was around 450. Sometimes it increased to be 500, 550. Some months it decreased. So it shows it's a very systematic tool, and it's used more often against Palestinians. This is why I'm claiming that it's about control, because it's much easier than charging someone in front of the court and you have a process that will take time. Here it's a secret file. The lawyer, the detainee don't have any access for these files. So there's nothing like legally that you can do. So all this judicial review session that they do is a very ridiculous process. And this is why actually this year the administrative detainees had strike for more than 7 months against the military court system. They tried to send a message to the court that we don't believe that these court sessions are bringing any justice, and we don't know why we have to deal with them. So they decided not to share in this process. Unfortunately, it wasn't much succeeding in putting an end to the policy as a policy. But the security service met the committee of the detainees, the representative committee, and they promised that they are going to look into the policy and review the standards and check whether they can minimize the number of administrative detainees and the new orders that they issue every year.
This is Camellia Gibran, a Palestinian folk singer, with her song On Man, from the album Dukhan al-Barakin, or Smoke of the Volcanoes. This is based on some poetry by the same name by Mahmoud Darwish.
السلاسل ربطوا يديه في صخرة الموتى وقالوا أنت قاتل. أخذوا طعامه والملابس والبيارق ورموه في زنزانة الموتى وقالوا أنت سارق. طردوه من كل المرافق، أخذوا حبيبته الصغيرة وقالوا أنت لاجئ. وضعوا على فمه السلاسل ربطوا يديه في صخرة الموتى وقالوا أنت قاتل. أخذوا طعامه والملابس والبيارق ورموه في زنزانة الموتى وقالوا أنت سارق. طردوه من كل المرافق، أخذوا حبيبته الصغيرة وقالوا أنت لاجئ. يداني العينين والكفين إن الليل زائل لغرفة التوقيف باقية ولا زرد السلاسل. يداني العينين والكفين إن الليل زائل لغرفة التوقيف باقية ولا زرد السلاسل.
نيرون مات ولم تمت روما، نيرون مات ولم تمت روما. بعينيها تقاتل، بعينيها تقاتل، بعينيها تقاتل،
بعينيها تقاتل. وحبوب سنبلة تموت ستملأ الوادي سنابل. وحبوب سنبلة تموت ستملأ الوادي سنابل.
ستملأ الوادي سنابل، ستملأ الوادي سنابل، ستملأ الوادي سنابل، ستملأ الوادي سنابل، ستملأ
سنبلة تموت ستملأ
So it's not just the Israeli government that's imposing these punishments, even if it is the Israeli government that is like ordering things like this, administrative segregation or administrative detention. Excuse me. As the more that I read about the circumstances in the occupied territory with incarceration, with prisoners' issues, the more it seems to me to echo problems that occur, although very much different, but echo problems that occur in incarceration in the United States. One of the things that comes up for me is your campaign against G4S. We have a lot of problems in the United States around, and more so that I just heard about a case in northern Mexico where a prison that's being run by a U.S. corporation that runs prisons in the U.S. is opening up a huge facility. But can you talk about G4S as a security company and how it relates to incarceration in the occupied territory?
Yeah, so G4S as a international security company was involved in the occupied territories, not just in the prison facilities. Of course, they were involved in 6 prisons inside Israel, where we have Palestinian prisoners actually in supporting the prisons with security facilities. But also they were involved in the settlements, security issues and the checkpoints and the wall. So this is why Addameer, jointly with other local Palestinian NGOs, with international NGOs, with the Palestinian National Committee for the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions as well, initiated this campaign against G4S. And it was in 2014, actually, when we decided to launch the campaign. And we were like, one powerful aspect of the campaign was this comparison between the situation in the occupied territories in relation to prisoners and prisons in the United States, prisons in the UK, prisons in South Africa, and in other countries where G4S was involved in these prison systems, and they were violating the international standards. So this is what was joint and powerful in the campaign, that it wasn't just about the Palestinian prisoners and the involvement on the business in the occupied territories. And this is why other people and other activist groups and grassroots groups decided to join the campaign. For 2 years, we were campaigning against the company, and at the end, the company decided to not to renew the contracts with the Israeli side. So they pulled from the prisons, the checkpoints, and the settlements. And we on the Palestinian side, we decided to minimize the campaign. We almost stopped the campaign, but I'm aware that it continues in other areas where still G4S is still involved in violation of human rights. But on the level of similarities between conditions and violations that prisoners face, whether in the Israeli prisons or in the US context, there's actually lots of issues that we can discuss on this level. Solitary confinement, for example, is a policy that is used a lot in the United States, and solitary confinement, again, it can amount to psychological torture, and it's used here against Palestinian prisoners. I would say in some cases it's even worse in the US, all the issue of privatization in the prisons At least here in Israel, there's no private prisons yet. Although there's aspects of privatization on the daily level, like, for example, the canteen and all the prison shop and the stuff that they can purchase in the canteen and how it's controlled by one company and so on. But I mean on the level of the healthcare, on the level of the family visits and so on. So this is one issue that Addameer started to work with our friends and supporters and other activist groups in the United States to build these connections in order to see how we can develop our joint work and joint campaigns and joint efforts in the issue of the political prisoners and prisoners in general.
Yeah, that's awesome. That you've been able to bridge that gap and find those commonalities around such a horrible thing, obviously, but yeah, it was really reminiscent reading through your website lists of prisoners with the horrible medical care or with decreased low caloric value or requesting access to educational opportunities while inside, or steps towards recourse, or as you said, like I had said before, administrative segregation, which is one of the words that they use for solitary confinement in the United States, depending on the facility. It's really mind blowing to come from the U.S. and to have it pointed out by other folks in the international community about just how devastatingly impactful and how recognized that solitary confinement is a form of torture, whereas in the United States, that's still a pretty new conversation in a lot of fields, I think, and it's just the mentality of punishment without thinking about the actual impact on the human being involved in that punishment. Yeah, but I'm glad that y'all have made that connection with folks in the U.S. I'm sure there's a lot of fertile ground to be able to resist from.
Yes.
I guess since you were talking about international campaigns and you mentioned boycott, divestment, sanctions, is that a thing that you'd want to talk about?
Addameer is, of course, part of the Palestinian non-governmental organizations network. And under this umbrella, we, of course, support the PDS campaign. We believe that accountability needs really such support because, as I said before, the international legal mechanisms are problematic when it comes for implementation and real accountability. And this is why we are failing all these years to find Israel accountable in the international level, because the international law mechanisms is not enabling powerful implementation procedures, unless if there's a decision by the Security Council, of course, to use sanctions. So, of course, with the veto of the United States, we will never, as Palestinians, get any decision from the Security Council level to sanction Israel. And this is why we initiated the boycott, divestment, and sanction, because boycott, it's for the individuals to decide to use such tools against entities or companies or institutions or anyone that is involved and complicit with grave violations of the Palestinians' rights. Divestment, of course, it's against the companies that are complicit, and sanctions is the role of the states. This is the main responsibility of the states, especially those that are members of the Fourth Geneva Convention, that they have to guarantee and to be sure that the states are respecting their obligations according to the international humanitarian law. And unfortunately, till now, Israel was never found accountable for all these war crimes and crimes against humanity that they commit on daily basis. And this is why we believe that the boycott, divestment, sanction campaign is very important.
On Monday, November 5th, Netanyahu signed on to increase the types of prisoners punishable by the death penalty by Israel. Is that correct?
He declared that he will support this bill in the Knesset if it would be brought to the second and the third review and hearings, because this bill initiative actually was submitted last year. In 2017, it was initiated by the Yisrael Beiteinu, Israel is our home political party. This is the party of the security minister, the Minister of Security, Avigdor Lieberman, who pushed this bill because, and it was actually a condition for entering the government coalition from his side. But last year and in January 2018, when it passed the first hearing in the Knesset, it was facing lots of criticism internally in the Israeli public opinion, and as well it was getting criticism from the security service people that they were highlighting that it will cause more tension, it will increase the level of attacks against soldiers, and maybe the activities of kidnapping soldiers in order to do exchanges if you want to implement death penalty. So they were opposing this bill. So it was frozen for a while. We believe that for their own political reasons, the internal political dynamics, what caused Netanyahu to declare that it will be brought again to be confirmed in front of the Knesset. Honestly, I'm not sure if this would be really confirmed. This is a possibility because, of course, the current Israeli government is a very right-wing, and there's a political, they have the majority in the Knesset, the right-wing groups and the government coalition, so it might be confirmed. But I think this would cause a serious debate and arguments against even in the Israeli public opinion.
Could you describe exactly what the change in the death penalty would be?
Yeah, so it should be highlighted that although death penalty is it's included in the Israeli criminal code in one aspect of crimes related to the Nazis and the Holocaust, and it's also included in the military orders. But inside Israel, it never was used just in one case, in the Eichmann case in the 60s, and also in the occupied territories. It was just in one case when the military prosecution requested death penalty, and the death penalty sentence in this case was later converted with life sentence. And never, ever the military prosecution requests death penalty. And the military order has another condition that if the panel of the judges want to sentence someone for death penalty, it should be a decision of the 3 judges agreeing for the death penalty. So it's a consensus decision. It's not a majority of 2 judges, for example, against 1 judge. It's enough that 1 judge opposing the death penalty, so it wouldn't be confirmed. This is the current situation, and this is what Lieberman aims to change. He wants to change the condition of the consensus to be a majority decision, and he wants to authorize the military governor that he can tell the military prosecution, you can use death penalty, you can request death penalty. The problem here as well that, military orders are issued by the military governor. It's not issued by the Knesset at all, because this is occupied territories. So far till now, all the legal system in the occupied territory is based on the military orders that is issued by the military governor. So also one point to raise is whether this is a sign of annexation, because if the Knesset thinks that they can interfere in the legislation level on the occupied territory by issuing this bill so easily, I think this shows that they have a real intention to annex the occupied territories.
Not to take up too much time with this, because I asked you on to talk about Palestine, but there's a lot of comparisons to be made between the United States, where I'm calling from, and Palestine in terms of the settler colonial system that's been implemented from the outside. Do you have any observations from someone living under a settler colonial rule that folks in the United States might learn from, other than the issue of the incarceration specifically?
I think the internal displacement policies that is still continuing, that of course in our context, Israel as a colonial state is still trying to control as much as they can land and displace Palestinian communities out of their and it's happening inside Israel and in the occupied territories. Two powerful examples about this is the Bedouin village in the Negev, al-Hiran, that was the High Court was confirming demolishing this village in order to have a Israeli settlement called Hiran. And the last case of the Bedouin village in the West Bank, Khan al-Ahmar, that also the state wants to evacuate them in order to expand the industrial area, the settlements between Mishor Adumim, Ma'ale Adumim, and others. So I mean, this is a very powerful natural resources like water and land issues, where you want to control the agriculture land, or you want to control water resources, so you force the community to leave, and you make their daily life so miserable, so they don't have any other choice but to look for better place maybe, and by this you would control. I think this is definitely joint issues between our context and what's going on in the United States.
Well, Sahar Francis, thank you so much for taking this time to talk. Where could you point people in the listening audience to find more information and more resources that they can further educate themselves to act from?
I think our website, Addameer.org, is also like a good resource for more information on the prisoners' issues. And allow me to mention as well the Defense for Children Palestine section, that they have also a very powerful campaign and information in relation to the child detainees cases.
Okay, and that's dci-palestine.org.
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking this time.
Thank you for the opportunity and for giving us this space.
Of course. Peace.